West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
So let's bring into the conversation special correspondent at Vanity Fair and the host of the Fast Politics podcast, Molly Jong-Fast. Molly, in your latest piece, you discuss how Trump 2024, his campaign, is the polar opposite of the one that got him the White House in 2016. And you write in part, much to the collective horror of the Republican donor class and all decent people everywhere, Trump is still very much in the game. Despite the recommendations from the bipartisan January 6th committee, Trump isn't barred from running for office after inciting an insurrection. While former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg and many stormed the U.S. Capitol on Trump's behalf have faced jail time, the former president hasn't been indicted yet. You continue. Trump is going to try and pretend he's not the subject of multiple criminal investigations and civil lawsuits. He'll probably stick to more conventional campaign stops as opposed to using his usual NASCAR campaign rallies teeming with boomer MAGA heads who travel around in F Your Feelings t-shirts. Luckily for Trump, the mainstream media has a bias toward normalcy. So the guy who is responsible for eroding democracy, being found to be the single largest driver of COVID disinformation, and ultimately ending his reign with a failed coup attempt, gets treated the same as Jeb Bush? Please clap. Trump's banking on the old Gore-Vidal adage. We are the United States of amnesia. We learn nothing because we remember nothing.
Well, here's a couple things to remember. Number one, for Republicans, Molly, Donald Trump is a guy that told staff members that Mike Pence deserved to be hanged on January the 6th.
There's too many things to
remember.
remember.
Donald Trump is the guy that wrote on his own social platform that the United States Constitution needed to be, quote, terminated. Donald Trump is the same guy who sat and stared at the riots while his children, his friends, and every one of his staff members in the White House begged him to stop it. And he did nothing. Some things here pretty hard to forget.
I think there's a bias towards normalcy in mainstream reporting, and so it ends up being very tough to put all those caveats in when you're just writing about a campaign stop. And so I think that Trump is going to try to use that as much as possible.
Yeah, so Donnie Deutsch, how do you report on this? It seems pretty obvious that when you have a guy that has called for the termination of the United States Constitution, called for it. The termination of the United States Constitution. You can't treat him like he's any other candidate. The New York Times can't treat him for. And Mika's right. Everybody's going to jail
for him. In the name of him.
Around him, everybody's going to jail.
Insurrectionists.
So the question is, how do you just pretend that he's any other candidate?
You don't. You don't. And I think the thing that's hit me, the sound bites we see of Trump lately, he just seems tired and beat up. He seems completely toothless and fangless. There's something beyond the fact that his act is old. He seems weathered. He seems beat up. He seems almost defeated, and the words are there. But if you kind of look at his mannerisms, or you look at his chest is not puffed out. He just feels like yesterday's tired, weakened news. So it's going to be interesting as he sticks his head further and further out how that plays out. But it's 4 years later. He's gone through January 6th. He's going through all these potential indictments. He just doesn't look like the same. Whether you loved him or hated him, he doesn't have that same strength, for lack of a better word. And Donald Trump without strength is nothing.
Yeah, there's this weird vibe around him. John Heilman, there was this weird vibe around him the night he made his announcement that he was running for president again. His kids wouldn't show up. A weird vibe in that South Carolina event.
It's like they were looking at the audience and they were uncomfortable by what they saw. Maybe it was very small, or I don't know what.
Well, I mean, Lindsey Graham looked like he was a hostage up there. The governor. Look at them. It's like a wake. It's just, again, everything, a political wake, everything seems strained and weak. I don't know. Maybe he pulls it off again. Right now, I don't see anybody beating him. But, my God, Donnie is right. He's lost more than a step.
I think that's right. And I think, Joe, I'm looking at the way Republicans of an older vintage kind of look at Trump, and I saw a newsletter the other day. My friend John Ellis, a member of the Bush family, but who's also a long time was at Fox News for a long time, and an ally of Roger Ailes, writes a very smart newsletter. And in this newsletter, he talked about how the conventional wisdom is a lot of the things that we're all saying here about Trump, but he doesn't really disagree with that. But he kind of made a really astute point, which was about part of the way to take on Trump is you got to take him on if you're a Republican. You eventually have to go man to man against him. Eventually you have to get in the ring with him. You have to be able to beat him. You have to be able to stand up to the bully, all that stuff. But the thing that the Republican Party has been lacking, notably, substantively and thematically over the course of the whole Trump era, has been any sense of optimism, any sense of hope, any sense of those Reagan qualities, forward-looking, all of that stuff that has generally worked for both parties, whether it was Bill Clinton and Barack Obama or whether it was Ronald Reagan. The party has become so mired in grievance and anger that one of the ways maybe to try to take Trump on, if you're a Republican, is to sort of stand up and say, that gold watch thing. Yeah, Donald, once upon a time you talked about making America great again. Thank you for your service as president for one term. You helped us make America great again. If you're a Republican, you would say that. And then say, but you know what? He's not only just a loser, but he's become mired in backward-looking grievance and anger. That's not the way forward for this great party that once believed in the shining city on the hill, and try to go back to some of those kind of but what have been winning formulas for both parties in the past, becoming about the voters, about the future, about optimism, and try to break that cycle in the Republican Party, which has become so dark and so angry and so grievance-laden. Instead, Ron DeSantis is doing exactly the opposite thing, and I think that maybe my friend John Ellis may be right about that. That may be part of the way that a Republican, if they could find it in them, in addition to being able to punch the bully in the nose, is also to try to make that kind of contrast on optimism and the thematic and the substantive that could really set the person apart from the way the Republican Party has become under Trump's leadership.
So think about these Republicans bowing to Trump and not able to really stand up for themselves as they declare their potential runs for the presidency. This man, Donald Trump, is drowning in legal woes. Think about how if one of them goes badly for him, if he's indicted or arrested, these people will also be on the wrong side of history. And what are the chances that inciting an insurrection is a bad thing and that you might have a consequence for that? What are the chances taking classified documents and holding them, defying a subpoena and holding them at your club in Florida what are the chances there's something illegal about that and there's something wrong with that and you might face consequences for that? Like, did these Republicans not see? Did they not hear that phone call he made to the Secretary of State? Yeah, get me 781 more votes. I just need a few more votes.
Well, they don't care.
I mean, there is possibly a consequence for that. And so you will be on the wrong side of history.
They don't care about that.
Well, maybe they'll care when it happens.
They haven't cared about that. They don't care about it now. I do, though, want to follow up on something very important, though, that John Heilemann said to Donnie Deutsch. And that is, it's about the future, man. Like, politics is about the future. Telling people what you're going to do to make their lives better. You know, I know a lot of people that watch this show who are progressive probably hate Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan talked about the future. He always ended his speeches talking about, I truly believe that America's greatest days lie ahead. He was optimistic about immigrants. He said, bring them to America. When we stop bringing immigrants to America, then we stop being a vital nation and we die as a nation. There was, again, whether you agreed with Reagan or not, he had policies. You had think tanks, the Heritage Foundation, before it became this backward-looking America First isolationist reactionary thing that it is right now. You had all of these young people going there talking about a conservative future, what it might look like, what programs could be implemented. This Republican Party, Donald Trump's Republican Party, is so pessimistic. And I'm sorry to go on here, but I had a friend yesterday who worked for Reagan that spent his whole adult life talking about Reagan. He's become a 2023 Trump conservative, so pessimistic. And I wrote him back yesterday and I was like, dude, I'm sorry. You may have worked for the guy, but I'm still an optimistic conservative. I know, I guess I'm a man out of time, but maybe I'm 40 years late here, but you're negative about everything. You're rude about everybody. You insult the First Lady of the United States because she uses doctor, just like Dr. Henry Kissinger, just like Dr. Brzezinski. You're rude to these people. You're backward looking. You're saying that we should let the Russians overrun Ukraine and the rest of it's so negative. This is a recipe for continued losing. Like, they don't, John's so right. They don't talk about the future anymore. They talk about the past. They talk about resentment. And in Florida, they're talking about young girls' menstrual cycles. They are whacked out of their heads and have no future in American politics unless they change course.
It is Monday, the 6th of February of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. That's right. We do it on Mondays with everything that you had over the weekend, except different. That's right. Okay, a little bit of inside baseball on the culinary industry. How are you doing? We don't have a balloon to kick around anymore now, do we? I guess the repugs, the MAGA types, they'll be using it for a while. I guess they're calling for hearings as we speak on the why Joe Biden did not divulge classified top secret information about that balloon before it got here. He's just not being transparent. Yeah. Okay. Now, of course, we have been hearing from our own military, by the way, that actually these balloons have been flying over quite often, and we've been tracking them, and we've been jamming them, and they happened numerous times during the Trump administration, and he never told anybody, and you know why. Because for many reasons. But anyway, I just love the hypocrisy. But the Trump team is denying that it ever happened. I never heard about it. Well, probably because you didn't have a security clearance, you crook. Yeah, all sorts of people are saying, I never heard about it. And then you look at where their security clearances were, and they were, down there with, you can't even deal with the classified bags. Okay? Maybe Trump, of course, did retroactively give everybody that he decided, well, you get a security clearance and you get a security clearance. So that could be the case, but we know how our military or our intel worked. There's some reportage coming out that actually, and we sort of knew this in real time, that there was lots of intel that there was no way they're going to let Trump know. If Trump purports to not know that there were balloons flying during his time in office, it's probably because if he told them, he would go on social media and threaten nuclear war. We're going to bomb China. We're going to nuke them. And no one wants that. Oh yeah, you think we got a problem now? Yeah, we're going to invite something really nice, and already the Chinese are so upset that we took these extreme measures and then brought down the balloon. You monsters! Well, 3 or more times flying over during the Trump administration, and he didn't do diddly. And, gotta tell you, Joe said, try it again. Try us again. And Xi hates that. So it's curious to me that the only two groups of people that really hate what Joe did with this balloon are MAGA repugs and the Chinese government. So I'm just saying. Coincidence? I don't know. Now, if Trump did know about the balloons flying over and he didn't want to divulge it, that could be for a number of reasons. Maybe one would be the $1 billion that he owes on loans to the Chinese government and businesses affiliated with such, hiding in those secret bank accounts while he was president. I've been getting my Twitter timeline. I got to tell you, I'm getting really pissed off at Elon Musk about what he has done to my news feed. But anyway, I'm getting any number of MAGA, I call them MAGA Nazis for short. Now, some people might argue they're not real Nazis because Nazis were of a particular definition and they don't fulfill that. And I would purport that actually they do. And anyway, it's Nazis for short. Anyway, MAGA Nazis, any number of them, just absolutely apoplectic that this would be going on, that we would bring down this balloon the way that we did. I wonder if they got secret bank accounts too, and they don't want anyone finding out. I would look into it. I doth think they protesteth too much. So who are you going to believe? The guy who's got secret bank accounts, $1 billion loan to the hostile foreign government flying the balloons over, or our military and intelligence? He always says, get rid of the Constitution. He always says, I believe Putin over these crooks in my intel, because he knows they know of his crimes. And we know that he knows they know of his crimes. And he wants to pretend that we don't know. And there's a lot of people out there who don't know and don't care. All right. Well, I just kind of bugs me that They use the term to define themselves as patriots, and they fly the flag. I want my flag back. Okay? Jeez. Anyway. Oh, they're all upset about Dr. Jill Biden giving an award to Bonnie Raitt at the Grammys. What? And I'm getting a lot of these bigots, MAGA Nazi bigots, with blue check marks in my timeline, Elon. Thank you very much. Who are just like, that the Grammys are not real America. And I'm like, oh, you want to use the N-word, don't you? You want to get rid of black culture. Black history is not American history. Yes, it is. In fact, I would say American history is black history, but that's just me. Well, it's not just black history. I think it's the history of the indigenous people that we genocided. No one hands out smallpox-infested blankets because they're being nice. I'll reiterate it once again. Adolf Hitler used as the model for his final solution what we were able to do with the indigenous peoples that populated this continent. And he said, "We are Germans, we can do it much better, faster, more efficient." And a lot of them were engineers, and they did. Which brings me to the argument that we should have more engineers running things. I'm like, That's right. The trains run on time. And you got to say, those ovens, they burn pretty hot. Gas stoves. That's what I was afraid of with the balloon, is that they were coming to take our gas stoves. Okay. Well, there's much more to speak about on any number of topics, but I suppose I should let you know, as if you didn't already, what we have in store for you here in the Bistro Cafe as we begin this fabulous River City Hash Mondays. Yeah, at the top, I know a lot of people hate Morning Joe, but I like Mika. I'm sorry. I pull for her every morning that I happen to have it on. And, yeah, sometimes it's on in the background and I just listen for a little bit. But anyway, Trump's 2024 campaign is anything but normal. So there. And they have Molly Jong-Fast on there, so I like her too. So on the rest of the menu, a cyber attack caused a nearly day-long outage of the nation's new 988 mental health helpline late last year. A major northern Florida hospital system was hit by a ransomware attack over the weekend. And spotty electronic poll book security raises considerable concerns going into 2024. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where a Buddhist temple has been extensively damaged by fire in the Australian city of Melbourne. And a 7.8 magnitude earthquake knocked down scores of buildings in central Turkey and Syria. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, and we thank Kelly for doing so. Across the page from the chat room link there to the left is the link to our Patreon page, and thank you to those of you who have been so generous over these many years by sending us what they might have spent on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month. They send those funds our way, and we've been able to put a pretty good-sized dent in the amount of money that we pay out on bills. So thank you for that generosity, and I got to be honest with you, we could use more of you. So consider it when you can. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter and Mastodon, you can do so at Netroots Radio. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll be getting on Spoutable hopefully today, and I'll get an account for myself on Mastodon as well, and maybe even the show. We'll see. But you can follow me on Twitter. That is where I post the show notes and links diary. Actually, I link to that because the show notes and links diary gets posted 10 minutes before showtime, and you can find that through Twitter, and soon, Spoutable and Mastodon. I almost said post. Maybe we'll go on post too. We'll see. As I mentioned, you can follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and I'll get a Mastodon account for us over there. Please do pick up podcasts, though, by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Amanda Seitz. A cyber attack caused a nearly day-long outage of the nation's new 988 mental health helpline late last year, federal officials told the Associated Press late Friday. Lawmakers are now calling for the federal agency that oversees the program to prevent future attacks. The attack occurred on the network for Intrado, the company that provides telecommunication services for the helpline. The agency did not disclose details about who it believes launched the attack or what kind of cyber attack occurred. Intrado is working with a third-party assessor to investigate the incident, and law enforcement agencies have been notified of the breach. The national 988 phone number, which can be reached by text, chat, or voice, has been a lifeline for millions of Americans seeking help during a mental crisis, with millions of calls pouring in during the first 6 months since its launch in July. The system is designed to work similarly to 911. It's a universal, easy-to-remember number that people can call in an emergency to reach a human who is working around the clock in a local call center. Those who tried on December 1st to reach the line for help with suicidal or depressive thoughts were instead greeted with a message that said the line is experiencing a service outage. Text and chat services, however, remained available to those who needed help. The FCC said in December it was investigating the outage. Intrado said at the time that the company was experiencing an incident that is impacting production across numerous systems and is working diligently to restore service. Intrado could not immediately be reached for comment. Last week, Democratic Representative Tony Cardenas and Republican Representative Jay Obernolte, both of California, introduced a bill calling for better coordination and reporting around cyber attacks on the 988 system. Even a few hours outage of the National Suicide Hotline can cost American lives, Obernolte said in a press release introducing the bill. It is critical that we negotiate the risks of future disruptions to the service and take steps to resolve cybersecurity vulnerabilities that could put the hotline at risk. Associated Press staff brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A major hospital system in northern Florida said it is diverting some emergency room patients and canceling surgeries after a security problem with information technology over the weekend. Tallahassee Memorial Healthcare said the issue began affecting its systems late Thursday night and has forced the hospital to shut down its IT network. It had the hallmarks of a ransomware attack, but the hospital has not yet characterized it as such, instead calling it an IT security issue. Victims often, at least initially, decline to confirm ransomware attacks. The hospital said in a statement that it was diverting some emergency room patients and rescheduling non-emergency patient appointments through Monday today. It said it was not moving patients currently in the hospital to other facilities. Patients will be contacted directly if their appointments are affected. It was unclear when systems would fully return online. The hospital said it has been working with law enforcement. The hospital, headquartered in Tallahassee, provides health care across 21 counties in northern Florida and southern Georgia. Cybersecurity firm Emsisoft said there were 25 ransomware attacks involving hospitals or hospital systems last year. Christina A. Cassidy of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. They were blamed for long lines in Los Angeles during California's 2020 presidential primary, triggered check-in delays in Columbus, Ohio a few months later, and were at the center of Trump's call for supporters to protest in Detroit during last November's midterms. High-profile problems involving electronic poll books have opened the door for those peddling election conspiracies and underscore the critical role the technology plays in whether voting runs smoothly. Russia and Iran have already demonstrated interest in accessing the systems. Despite their importance and potential vulnerabilities, national standards for the security and reliability of electronic poll books do not exist, and efforts underway to develop them may not be ready or widely adopted in time for the 2024 presidential election. Poll workers use electronic poll books to check in voters. They typically are a tablet or laptop computer that accesses an electronic list of registered voters with names, addresses, and precinct information, with some doing so through an internet connection. Testing standards and a certification program for voting machines have been in effect for years, a process overseen by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. While compliance is voluntary, most states will at least use some aspect of the federal process to ensure their voting and ballot counting machines are secure and functioning properly. But there is a much wider system of technology that supports U.S. elections beyond the devices used to scan and tally votes. From election poll books to voter registration databases and systems used to report unofficial election results to the public. Their use has been expanding rapidly in recent years. Nearly 1/3 of all voting jurisdictions in the U.S. used electronic poll books in 2020, compared with about 18% 4 years earlier. The systems come with unique security challenges. In 2016, Russian hackers scanned state voter registration systems looking for vulnerabilities and even accessed the voter registration database in Illinois, although an investigation later determined no voter data was manipulated. In 2020, Iranian hackers obtained confidential voter data and used it to send misleading emails to voters seeking to spread misinformation and influence the election. Experts say the systems could be prime targets again for those seeking to disrupt the voting process and sow chaos around U.S. elections. Gaining access to a voter registration database, for example, could allow someone to delete voters from the rolls. When people show up to vote, they are told they are not on the list, although those voters would be able to cast a provisional ballot that eventually could count. Yeah, right. Widespread problems with the voter registration database could trigger questions about a process that already has suffered a loss in public confidence following a sustained campaign by Trump and his allies to discredit the results of the 2020 presidential election. There is no evidence of widespread fraud or manipulation of voting equipment in 2020, backed up by exhaustive reviews in states lost by Trump. Unlike voting machines that are not directly connected to the internet, many electronic poll book systems are connected by design. Some are quite sophisticated. In counties that have put in place a vote center model where registered voters can cast a ballot at any polling place, electronic poll books must be able to communicate with each other and with a central system. That's to ensure voters are not able to cast ballots at multiple locations or vote in person after returning a mail ballot. While that can present significant security challenges, scrutiny for the poll book system is not as consistent as with voting machines. The lack of national standards has left state and local election officials on their own. For the 2020 election, 15 states, including Arizona, Florida, and Nevada, did not require any type of electronic poll book testing or certification. States and even some counties are often testing their poll book systems in isolation, and results are not routinely shared, an information gap that could be addressed with a national testing program. Well, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world. And we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, body horror meets soul horror. When evaluating a film like Infinity Pool or maybe anything from the Cronenbergs, this is the third and first wide release from the younger Brandon, the question you have to ask is whether the violence and gore are in service of some point or aesthetic. A popular theme in cinema and prestige TV these days, think the Westworld series or The Menu, is the depravity often associated with money and power, and what that says about the human condition. In this one, we meet second-rate novelist James and his wife with the money M, Alexander Skarsgård and Cleopatra Coleman, as they're beginning a vacation in a third-world country, which is creepily both tropical and Soviet. We also meet Mia Goth's show-stealing character Gabby, who we first think is buttering James James up because she's attracted to him. She may be, but we soon find out that her motivations run deeper. After a night of partying, James and Em, Gabby and her husband, leave the compound, running over and killing a local, after which they find out that in that country, the penalty for such a crime is execution or, and this is the flourish that distinguishes this movie, paying to have a double cloned, whom the wealthy culprit can then watch be executed. James is initially intrigued with this custom, which we learn has given rise to a small cult of Westerners who essentially get off on it, staying in country to commit horrible crimes and experiencing the so-called consequences. Way past the bad places where some of the characters from Westworld end up, in the observation of their own torment in Infinity Pool, we have metaphorical baggage aplenty with which to engage, and if you're not squeamish, the over-the-top close-up carnage does drive it home. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Emily Schwing. In September, a massive storm on Alaska's west coast brought a surge of water 17 miles inland from the Bering Sea to the Chupik village of Chivak.
The storm was crazy.
What was crazy about it?
It flooded down there. It was like a sea, but
it was like an ocean.
Some powers turned out, and some people had to sleep at the school for 3 days.
Just over 900 people live in this community. It sits on a high bank above the Ninglakfak River. Elder John Pengayak says the storm shook his resolve.
For 3 days I was in turmoil because I finally realized how dangerous our situation here in western Alaska is vulnerable from very high winds and water surge.
The impact of the storm, called Merbok, is very real for thousands of rural residents in western Alaska. Dozens of villages saw some level of flooding. People lost power, causing chest freezers to defrost. The power outages destroyed months of subsistence food that people spent their summers storing up. Food security in this part of the state is precarious, and on top of defrosted freezers, nearly all of the 90 or so boats people use to go fishing and hunting for their main sources of food in Chivak were damaged or destroyed. Pengayak says the losses are devastating.
It's our survival.
Yeah.
If I'm a Chupik, subsistence is mine. That's me. That's subsistence is me. Because I'm the one that's going out and fishing. I'm the one that's going out and hunting for my family. And we do it for livelihood and survival.
When the flood came in, it filled up with water, and then it drifted over and sunk right on the river channel.
Clinton Slats was in Chivak's community hall days after the storm to report his losses to 2 employees who the village's tribal council had hired to take reports on the damage. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to retrieve his boat from the bottom of the Ninglakfak River.
Hard to put into words how it impacts. It's just, I have no way to go hunt and gather with the remainder of the season by boat.
The storm didn't just destroy boats and motors. Nearly a dozen fishing sheds that held all sorts of gear, from rifles to nets to gas cans and rain gear, were destroyed. Some had completely disappeared from the riverbank. Elsewhere across Alaska, summer fish camps and hunting cabins were destroyed. And because the storm arrived in Alaska before the ground was frozen, coastal erosion was extreme.
And so, of course, it's much easier to erode material that doesn't even have any ice in there to help stabilize it even a little, as compared to the same storm, say, now, where things have started to freeze up.
That's Rick Toman, a climate specialist at the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
But the warming oceans contribute to that longer period of time before freeze-up gets going. And that, again, is something that is sure to continue into the future.
He says conditions this year in the South Pacific were ripe for the development of a storm like Merbok.
Historically, the waters in that part of the subtropical Pacific are just not warm enough to support typhoon development. But this year, the much of the subtropical Pacific east of Japan is far warmer than normal. Some areas the warmest on record.
This storm was rare. Alaska hasn't seen anything like it in 50 years. Dozens of rural communities saw infrastructure damage in addition to flooding. Many scientists, including Toman, believe the storm, which originated as a typhoon in the northwestern Pacific, is a harbinger of what climate change could bring to the northernmost U.S. state in coming years.
Certainly, we know a big contributor to the increased impacts isn't that there are more storms, but rather storms are coming when there's no sea ice.
As the coldest months of winter bear down on Alaska, there's still currently no significant shore-fast sea ice along Alaska's Bering Sea coast or further north along the shoreline of the southern Chukchi Sea, other than around the mouths of rivers. It's a phenomenon that's become the norm in recent years.
In the 20th century, there would have been sea ice to offer protection or act as a buffer or a wave break. And with that gone, the impacts have increased.
After Merbok developed as a powerful typhoon, it made its way north and east toward Alaska. As it did so, it grew into something meteorologists really don't even have a word for. Some people called it the remnants of a typhoon. Toman referred to it as an ex-typhoon. But that kind of language doesn't do justice to describe its power or immensity. By the time it slammed into Alaska, it had tripled in size alone.
Over the long term, there's not any good hard evidence that the intensity of these storms is increasing, but the background that they're working in, a warmer environment, a less frozen environment, is really, I think, the driver of the impacts.
Residents in dozens of western Alaskan communities continue to repair damaged homes and outbuildings and to apply for disaster assistance through the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the state government, and other organizations. What Merbok laid bare is their vulnerability and the extreme need for improved and strengthened infrastructure as such storms become the new normal in the region. For 60 Second Science, I'm Emily Schwinn.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1919. That day began the week-long general strike in Seattle, Washington. As World War I drew to a close, many workers in the city were frustrated by 2 years without pay increases due to the war. 35,000 workers in the shipyards walked off the job. Workers from most of the 110 union locals across the city voted to support the general strike. At 10 a.m. on February 6th, the citywide strike began. As many as 65,000 workers, or a fifth of the entire workforce of the city, walked off the job. They were met by a combined force of the police and the military. It has been nearly a century since the Seattle general strike. This unprecedented stand by the city's workers has been remembered and commemorated in many ways. Perhaps the most innovative memorial came in the form of a rock opera. In 1985, Rob Rosenthal set the story of the strike to music. He based the lyrics on research and interviews he did as a graduate student at UC Santa Barbara over the course of 10 years. a band named The Fuse formed to record the 21-song album. The final project was a blend of rock, blues, and folk. The music tells the story of a fictional man who comes to Seattle looking for work in the shipyards during World War I, joining the labor movement and the strike. What labor history event would you like to hear set to music?
Without our muscle, without our brain, nothing would ever go. We run it all. We run it all.
Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Who's in the city? Unless we say so. Let the bosses curve.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 33 degrees Fahrenheit under foggy conditions, expecting a high in the low 50s, winds light and variable. Had a bit of rain over the last 30-some hours, and we'll have partly cloudy skies this evening, becoming overcast overnight, lows in the low 30s, winds light and variable, and then considerable cloudiness tomorrow with occasional rain showers, highs in the mid-50s, winds out of the south at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Pollen is rated as none here in the little village of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good at 32 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is falling at 30.6 inches. Visibility is less than half a mile, and relative humidity is at 100%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 49 degrees and sunny. Paris is 45 and sunny. Rome is 48 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 26 and cloudy. Kabul is 25 and clear. Hong Kong is 66 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 47 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 72 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 47 degrees and sunny. And New York is 52 degrees Fahrenheit, partly cloudy, with a small craft advisory for the region. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Associated Press staff brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. A Buddhist temple has been extensively damaged by fire in the Australian city of Melbourne. About 80 firefighters fought the blaze at the Bright Moon Buddhist temple for more than 2 hours before it was brought under control late yesterday, Sunday. Spot fires were still being put out today. There were no injuries in the fire that was visible for several miles. The cause of the fire was not yet known, Assistant Fire Chief Officer Paul Foster said. He told the Australian Broadcasting Corp that the effort to fight the fire was done with cultural sensitivity. Not only is it a place of worship, it's a place of gathering for the local Buddhist community, and at all times we were engaging with members from that community to inform them what we were doing and taking into account their concerns, Foster said. About 30 residents were evacuated from the area overnight, and others were told to close their windows to avoid the smoke.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mais automne, quand les feuilles tombent partout, si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Mehmet Güzel, Gaith Al-Said, and Susan Frazier of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A powerful 7.8 magnitude earthquake rocked wide swaths of Turkey and neighboring Syria, killing more than 2,300 people, injuring thousands and more as it toppled hundreds of buildings and trapped residents under mounds of rubble or pancake floors. Authorities feared the death toll would climb as rescuers searched through tangles of metal and concrete for survivors in a region beset by more than a decades of serious civil war and a refugee crisis. Residents, jolted out of sleep by the pre-dawn quake, rushed outside in the rain and snow to escape falling debris, while those who were trapped cried for help. Major aftershocks, including one nearly as strong as the initial quake, continued to battle the region. The quake, which was centered on Turkey's southeastern province of Kahramanmaraş, sent residents of Damascus rushing into the street and was felt as far away as Cairo and Beirut. In Adana, 20 or so people used power saws atop a collapsed cement building to clear out space for any survivors to climb out or be rescued. The men picked up rubble and threw it elsewhere in a tedious process. In the rebel-held enclave, hundreds of families remain trapped in rubble. The opposition emergency organization called the White Helmets said in a statement, the area is packed with some 4 million people displaced from other parts of the country by the war. Many of them live in buildings that are already wrecked from past bombardments. The region sits on top of major fault lines and is frequently shaken by earthquakes. Some 18,000 were killed in similarly powerful quakes that hit northwest Turkey in 1999. The U.S. Geological Survey measured today's quake at 7.8 with a depth of 18 or 11 miles. Hours later, a 7.5 magnitude quake struck more than 100 kilometers or 60 miles away. Bitterly cold temperatures could reduce the time frame that rescuers have to save trapped survivors. Television stations in Turkey aired screens split into 4 or 5 showing live coverage from rescue efforts in the worst-hit provinces. In the city of Kahramanmaraş, rescuers pulled 2 children alive from the rubble, and one could be seen lying on a stretcher on the snowy ground. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Appétit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goer. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.